Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Derek Hoffman woke up that Thursday in September the same way he had every day for the past 12 years, with his alarm going off at 6:15 in the morning, the smell of coffee that Vanessa always brewed in the kitchen, and the predictable routine of a marriage he believed was solid. At 38, Derek had built a respectable career as an architect in Seattle, working on residential projects that blended functionality with modern design. Vanessa, his 36-year-old wife, worked as a marketing manager at a tech company and had always seemed content with the life they'd built together. They lived in a comfortable house in a quiet suburb, had mutual friends, took occasional trips, and talked about future plans that included possibly having kids soon. Nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared Derek for what would happen that night. Vanessa got home around 7, but not with her usual smile or the quick kiss she typically gave before dropping her bag on the couch. She walked in serious, almost solemn, and asked to talk. Derek was in the kitchen making a simple dinner, pasta with homemade tomato sauce, a recipe he'd learned from his Italian grandmother and that he usually made on Thursday nights. He felt his stomach tighten at the gravity in her tone. They sat down at the dining table, and Vanessa began speaking with a rehearsed calm that made it clear this wasn't impulsive. She said she needed space, that the marriage felt worn down, that it seemed like they were just going through the motions without any real emotional connection. Her words came out as if memorized, maybe practiced in front of her office bathroom mirror. Derek sat frozen, fork still in hand, unable to process what he was hearing. He tried to argue, asked what was wrong, suggested couples therapy, a vacation, anything that might fix what he hadn't even realized was broken. Vanessa stayed firm. She wanted to live alone for a while, to find herself, to rethink her life. Derek felt the floor drop out from under him, but he clung, naively and desperately, to the hope that maybe this was just a rough patch, something they could overcome if he gave her the time she asked for. After all, didn't 12 years together deserve a chance? 2 weeks passed in a fog of silent pain that turned their house into a mausoleum of memories. Vanessa rented a small apartment about 5 miles away in a trendier, busier neighborhood near downtown Seattle, and took only clothes and personal items. She kept in touch with Derek through brief, polite texts that arrived at irregular intervals, always reiterating that she needed this time alone to think. Derek sank into a deep sadness that consumed him in the most unexpected ways. He cried in the shower, lost his appetite, woke up in the middle of the night reaching for her on the other side of the bed. Work became a refuge, but he returned home every night to a suffocating emptiness, the kind that comes from losing something precious without understanding why. Their mutual friends grew uncomfortable, unsure what to say or how to act, and Derek started avoiding social gatherings so he wouldn't have to explain the situation over and over or face pitying looks. It was on a Saturday morning, while sorting through financial documents in his home office to prepare their tax return, that Derek decided to review the statement from their joint bank account. They hadn't split their accounts yet, partly because Vanessa said she'd handle it gradually, and partly because Derek still held out hope for reconciliation. When he opened the digital statement on his computer, Derek frowned. There were strange charges that completely broke from Vanessa's usual spending habits: a $240 dinner at Il Terrazzo Carmine, an upscale Italian restaurant she loved and where they'd celebrated their wedding anniversary years before. There were also 2 reservations at the Alexis Hotel, a boutique downtown spot known for its discreet luxury and elegant decor, totaling over $500 in lodging alone. Add to that purchases from high-end women's clothing stores, imported perfumes, designer shoes. Derek's heart raced and his hands went cold. Vanessa had always been careful with money, prioritizing savings and investments, and in recent weeks she'd insisted in texts that she was living simply in her new apartment, cooking at home, and cutting back. None of these expenses made any sense. Suspicion took deep root in his mind, spreading like a weed that chokes everything around it, and Derek realized he needed answers, immediately. He picked up the phone, hands trembling slightly, and called Sophie Chen, Vanessa's best friend since college. Sophie, a 36-year-old entrepreneur who ran a yoga clothing boutique downtown, had always been close to the couple, and Derek trusted her as he trusted few others. She answered on the third ring, and Derek went straight to the point, without preamble or hesitation. "Sophie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is Vanessa seeing someone else?" There was a long silence on the other end, so heavy and dense that Derek felt nausea rise in his throat. Sophie let out a deep sigh and, in a hesitant but sincere voice, said, "Derek, I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, I swear I didn't, but yes. She's with someone. A guy named Greg Lawson, a personal trainer at the gym where she works out. It started about 2 months ago, maybe a little more. She's mentioned him to me a few times like it was totally normal, without showing any guilt at all." Derek felt the room spin, as if he were trapped on a carousel spinning out of control. He thanked Sophie in a choked voice and hung up without saying another word. Anger came in waves, each one stronger than the last, mixed with humiliation, betrayal, and a visceral pain that physically ached in his chest, as if someone were squeezing his heart in their hands. Vanessa hadn't needed space to find herself. She'd needed space to live out a romance without having to hide it or lie to his face every day. She'd turned her request for separation into a guilt-free pass to break the vows they'd made to each other. Derek couldn't wait another minute. That same Saturday, around 4 in the afternoon, he got in his car and drove to Vanessa's apartment, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't call ahead or warn her, he just showed up and rang the doorbell forcefully, insistently. Vanessa opened the door, surprised, dressed casually, clearly not expecting company, least of all her husband. "Derek? What are you doing here?" Her voice carried a mix of shock and irritation. He walked in without asking, holding the freshly printed bank statement, the pages still warm from the printer. He tossed the sheets onto the small, minimally decorated coffee table. "Space for yourself, or space for Greg?" His voice came out icy, laced with sarcasm sharp enough to cut glass. Vanessa went pale instantly, her eyes wide like an animal caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" She tried to feign confusion, but her performance was weak, transparent. Derek gave her no room for more theater. "Don't insult me any more than you already have, Vanessa. $240 at Il Terrazzo? $500 at the Alexis Hotel? Sophie told me everything about Greg. Congratulations on the act. You really had me convinced you needed time alone." Vanessa stumbled back to the couch, sitting down with visibly shaking hands. At first, she tried to deny it, stammering that Sophie was lying, that it was all coincidence, that she could explain, but Derek cut her off with a firm, bitter voice, "No. It's over. You don't owe me any more lies. Just admit it and at least show that much dignity." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Vanessa began to cry, but these weren't tears of genuine remorse, they were the tears of someone caught red-handed, watching her house of cards collapse. Finally, between ragged sobs, she admitted it. She said she'd met Greg at the gym, that he was attentive and funny, that he made her feel desired in a way their marriage no longer did. She tried to justify it by saying their relationship had been dead for a long time, that Derek was too predictable, too mechanical, that she had a right to seek happiness. Derek listened with growing disbelief and anger that made his temples throb. When she finished speaking, he replied in a controlled but pained voice, "Moving on is one thing, Vanessa. Ending a marriage honestly is another. But lying, manipulating, making me look like a fool while you played house with another guy using our money? That's pure cowardice. You owed me at least the truth." Vanessa reached for his arm, but Derek recoiled as if her touch burned. "I'm leaving, and you don't need to pretend anymore. Enjoy your space." He walked out of the apartment without looking back, hearing her sobs behind him as the door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. The days that followed were a blur of practical decisions and emotional pain that alternated in exhausting cycles. Derek hired a divorce attorney the following Monday and officially started the separation process with all the necessary paperwork. He blocked Vanessa on social media, immediately split their bank accounts, and began reorganizing his life mechanically, as if he were just ticking off tasks from a list someone had handed him. It was Sophie who became a constant presence during those endless, dark days. A few days after the confrontation, she showed up at Derek's house with homemade Thai food, his favorite, and a bottle of red wine. They sat on the back porch and talked for hours as the sun set, painting the sky orange and purple. Sophie apologized for not telling him sooner, saying she'd been torn between loyalty to her longtime friend and what she knew was morally right. Derek thanked her for being honest when he'd asked directly. "You saved me from being deceived even longer," he said wearily, and Sophie smiled with genuine sadness. They started talking more often in the days that followed, texting during the day to check in, late-night calls that stretched for hours, dinners that began as emotional support but gradually turned into something deeper. Sophie was everything Vanessa wasn't: clear as crystal, genuinely attentive, with a subtle sense of humor that made Derek laugh even on his hardest days, and a real, unpretentious way of caring for the people around her. Slowly and somewhat surprisingly, Derek realized he'd always admired these qualities in her, but he'd never thought of Sophie romantically because she was his wife's best friend, a line that could never be crossed. Now, with Vanessa out of the picture and that invisible but impenetrable barrier gone, their connection flowed naturally, like a river finding its course. On a cold November night, as they walked through Pike Place Market under the golden glow of storefront lights, Sophie confessed she'd always thought Derek was an admirable man, dedicated, loyal in a way that was rare to find. Vanessa never knew what she had, Sophie said with a sincerity that left no room for doubt. Something stirred inside Derek's chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time and had thought he'd lost forever: hope. They kissed for the first time that night, under the city lights reflected in the waters of Puget Sound, and it was unlike anything Derek had ever experienced: light, honest, free of psychological games or social masks. 3 months after the explosive confrontation at Vanessa's apartment, Derek and Sophie went public with their relationship, no longer hesitating or hiding. They stopped concealing their dates, posted photos together on Instagram, and dined out with mutual friends who slowly started including them in social events again. It was inevitable that Vanessa would find out. It happened through a photo on Instagram posted by a mutual friend, showing Derek and Sophie smiling together at a charity event for underprivileged children, clearly a couple, clearly happy. Vanessa called Derek that same night, her voice thick with barely contained fury in every syllable. "How could you do this to me? With my best friend? You're being vindictive, Derek. That's low." He let her vent her entire outburst without interrupting, letting her exhaust all her pent-up anger, and when she finally paused to catch her breath, he replied with infuriating calm, "Vindictive? Vanessa, you asked for space. I gave you exactly what you wanted. And in that space, I found someone who truly respects me, someone who doesn't need lies to get through the day, someone who doesn't treat me like a backup plan. Thanks for setting me free from all that." Vanessa screamed something unintelligible about betrayal and hypocrisy, but Derek calmly hung up and immediately blocked her number. Weeks later, with the divorce well underway and lawyers negotiating the final terms, Vanessa tried a completely different approach. She called Derek from an unknown number, her voice soft and repentant, trying to sound sincere. She said she'd made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. Greg, she claimed, was immature and shallow, a monumental error in judgment, and she'd only realized too late that the real value had been in what they'd built together over 12 years. She begged for another chance, saying she was willing to go to individual and couples therapy, to change completely, to become the wife he deserved. Derek listened with a mix of disbelief and genuine pity for the woman he'd once loved. "Vanessa, you don't miss me as a person. You miss the security I represented, the financial and emotional stability. But I'm not your plan B for when things go wrong with someone else. Don't call again." He hung up once more and blocked the new number without hesitation. Sophie, who'd been sitting beside him on the couch during the call, squeezed his hand firmly and said simply, "She doesn't even deserve your thoughts, love." The divorce was finalized officially the following February, 7 months after that fateful Thursday when everything began to crumble. The division of assets was fair and largely uncontested, because Derek only wanted to close that painful chapter of his life once and for all. He kept the house, since he'd paid most of the substantial down payment with a family inheritance he'd received years earlier, and Vanessa received a fair financial settlement calculated by their lawyers. There were no children, which simplified everything legally and sped up the process, but it also deepened the sense of emptiness Derek felt for a while, realizing that 12 years had ended without leaving any lasting roots. Sophie became not just his girlfriend, but his partner in every meaningful sense. She supported him through the hardest moments of emotional recovery, without judgment, without pressure to get over it quickly. She encouraged Derek to start drawing again for pleasure, not just for work, a habit he'd abandoned years ago, and it was she who suggested they take a trip together to the Oregon coast in March, a journey that marked the true beginning of deep emotional healing. Derek and Sophie's relationship blossomed organically and deeply over the following months. They talked about absolutely everything, from philosophy to the best kind of pizza, shared their most intimate dreams and fears, laughed at silly things only they understood, and supported each other through difficulties without demands. Sophie introduced Derek to her entrepreneurial world, and he began helping her with design ideas to expand her boutique into a second location. Derek introduced Sophie to his parents over a Sunday dinner, and they welcomed her with genuine warmth, later commenting privately that she was exactly the kind of person they'd always hoped their son would find: authentic, hardworking, kind. They made real future plans together, plans built on solid trust, not romantic illusions. Vanessa, meanwhile, watched her life unravel in ways she hadn't foreseen, even in her worst nightmares. Her affair with Greg ended in less than 4 months after the devastating confrontation with Derek. Greg, it turned out later through mutual acquaintances at the gym, never intended to commit seriously to anyone. He started dating a younger gym client, a 22-year-old college student named Brittany, and simply stopped replying to Vanessa's increasingly desperate messages. She was left alone in the apartment she'd rented to live the freedom she'd so badly wanted, but which now felt like nothing more than an empty, cold, purposeless space. She lost Sophie as a best friend, of course, and Sophie made that absolutely clear in one tense phone call, saying firmly but respectfully, "You made conscious choices, Vanessa. So did I. Derek deserves someone who truly values him, and I'm going to be that person." Mutual friends gradually distanced themselves from Vanessa, some due to social discomfort, others because they genuinely disapproved of how she'd treated Derek. Social media, once a constant source of validation and likes, became painful reminders that Derek was happy, truly and visibly happy, and that she'd thrown away something valuable and irreplaceable for a fleeting, superficial illusion. There was one particularly tense moment about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, when Vanessa tried to speak to Sophie in person one last time. She showed up at Sophie's boutique on a busy Saturday afternoon, demanding a conversation. Sophie received her with icy professional courtesy but unmistakable personal coldness. Vanessa, voice trembling and eyes red, accused Sophie of stealing Derek, of betraying their decade-long friendship, of waiting for the perfect moment to make her calculated move. Sophie listened without changing her serene expression, and when Vanessa finished her rehearsed speech, she replied with devastating calm, "You threw him away like trash, Vanessa. You treated your marriage like something disposable and Derek like a fool who deserved to be lied to. I didn't steal anyone. I recognize the worth of an honorable man you were completely blind to. And no, I wasn't waiting for an opportunity. It happened naturally because we genuinely care about each other, something you apparently never did. Now, please leave my store and don't come back." Vanessa walked out sobbing uncontrollably, but there was nothing left to say or negotiate. A year and a half after the initial separation that began with that request for space, Derek proposed to Sophie over a simple dinner at home, no Hollywood theatrics, just the two of them, candles lit, and absolute certainty that they'd found something real and lasting. Sophie said yes through tears of genuine happiness, and they began planning a small, intimate wedding for the following autumn with only close family and true friends. Derek no longer held resentment toward Vanessa, not because he'd forgiven her in the traditional sense, but because she simply no longer occupied any emotional space in his life. He'd found something infinitely better, something built on honesty, mutual respect, and real love. When Vanessa learned of the engagement through public posts by friends who still followed Derek on Instagram, she felt the final, crushing weight of her disastrous choices. There was no going back, no what-ifs or second chances. She'd demanded space, and gotten it in abundance, but that space had turned into permanent, suffocating loneliness. She'd lost the devoted husband who'd loved her unconditionally, her loyal best friend of over a decade, the respect of friends and colleagues, and the chance at a life that could have been genuinely good and stable. Greg, the man for whom she'd risked and destroyed everything, was now just a distant, deeply shameful memory she tried to erase. Vanessa had to face the painful truth that the space she'd so desperately wanted and demanded hadn't led her to the promised self-discovery or imagined happiness, but to existential emptiness and profound regret for having destroyed something valuable and irreplaceable with her own selfish hands. Derek and Sophie married in an outdoor ceremony in September, surrounded by loving family and true friends who celebrated a love built on solid ground. Their life moved forward with concrete plans, expanding Sophie's business by opening 2 new stores, Derek taking on more creative and daring architectural projects he'd always wanted to try but never allowed himself before, and serious conversations about possibly starting a family together in the near future. It was a life built on conscious choices, open communication, and genuine love that grew stronger every day. Vanessa remained alone, stuck in the same unfulfilling job, living in the same apartment she'd rented to chase a fantasy that lasted less than a season. She learned, in the most painful and irreversible way possible, that space isn't freedom when it's earned through lies and betrayal, and that some bridges, once burned with gasoline and matches, can never be rebuilt. Derek had found not just a new partner, but a new version of himself, stronger, wiser, and happier. And it all began, ironically, with a request for space that freed the right man to find the right woman who'd been there all along, waiting. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.